Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for your next PB&J card class. This is the third in a series of 3 videos featuring Penny Black's new portrait stamps from their Poetic collection. And in case you missed the first 2 videos, I will be sure to link to both of those down in the YouTube description box below. And for this set of cards, I wanted to create a set of uplifting cards that featured nearly 1-layer designs and combine these new portrait stamps with some masking and stamping and a few of my favorite floral stamps. So on the card we're making today, I've used Isabelle, which is the new portrait stamp, along with the So Lucky miniature transparent set and Poppy Time, which is one of my all-time favorite Penny Black stamps. And I will have a full supply list at the end of the video, so I just wanted to mention that. That includes the stamps, the inks, everything that I'm using on today's card. So to begin, I am stamping this onto Canson 140-pound watercolor paper, and I'm stamping using smoky gray VersaFine ink. And I really like this kind of sketched, almost pencil line look that ink color gives, as opposed to a stark black ink. So I stamped the Poppy first because I want that to be in front of her face, and then I stamped it again onto just thin computer regular typing paper, and I cut out a mask, and I'm just using my magnets here on the Misty, my stamp positioning tool, to hold this in place, and then I will position her and do the stamping. Now I'm stamping using the Misty stamp positioning tool by my Sweet Petunia just because I'm stamping onto watercolor paper and it has some texture to it, and this lets me do multiple impressions to get a really good stamped image. But this technique can certainly be done with just your standard acrylic block and the slapstick cling and transparent stamp sets. So I've got that mask down, and now I'm just deciding where I want to position her. And then I will go ahead and stamp again. And I'm also going to stamp her with that same smoky gray ink. I find I really like using this ink color, or even like a dark brown ink as opposed to the black, especially for the faces. And like I said before, I just am stamping it a couple of times, making sure to get all of the details onto the somewhat textured watercolor paper. Just making sure here that I like that, and I love taking off the mask to reveal the stamp design. Now most of the stamping you can do like I'm doing here, all of the stamping at once. It's almost a 1-layer card. All that I add is a little sentiment at the end. Then you could go about painting this whenever you had time throughout the week. Just take your time and have it ready to go whenever you have a few minutes that you can sit down. Now I did go ahead and sketch on like a little tank top for her, and I'm adding a few details here. I like to give the girls a bit of a smile, so I just sketched it on with a pencil first, and then I'm going over that with a Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft Pitt Artist pen, and this is the extra small tip. And I find this is really nice for adding in some of these, or darkening up some of these details, or any parts that I sketch and add to the stamped girls. So I am using that on her eyes. So by stamping it in a lighter gray ink, then you can decide which details you want to be more predominant and featured. I'm also giving her some eyelashes, just lengthening those and darkening them up. And these are the little things that can really change the look of the girls each time you stamp them. So you can make multiple cards with the same one and they all will look different. It's amazing how they just sort of come to life as you're working on them. And if you haven't used these portrait stamps before or done faces, I really encourage you to give it a try. It's quite fun to see how they come to life. Now I'm painting her using my Sakura Koi Field Sketch Box, which yes, it is very well loved and quite messy. And I just pointed out there I'm going to use that sort of peach color up in the top right and the brown that's down in that bottom row. And in the first video in this series, I did a lot more talking and instruction on my technique for painting the face. I keep things really simple. I don't do a ton of shading. I just like to just keep it simple for the faces. They're so beautiful on their own that they don't need a lot of shading if that's not something that you're comfortable with. So I'm going to just turn on some music here as I paint her in, but if you're looking for more detailed instruction on my technique with the face, be sure to check out the first video in this series. Again, link below down in the YouTube description box, and I explain things a lot more in detail in that one. So now that I have painted her face using the watercolors, I dried that with my heat gun, and I'm going in now with a Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft Art Grip colored pencil, and this is just in a brown color, and I'm just adding some sketchy lines on top of those that were part of the stamp, and that allows me just to darken up a few areas. Next, I'll move on to her hair, and I'm starting by putting my layer of paint just right here closest to her face first. And then I will go in and just sort of blend that out with water on my brush. So I rinsed off my brush and I'm coming back and just blending that in. I'm not trying to do a ton of shading on her hair because I'm going to go back and add just some polka dots and some details to that, so I don't feel like it needs a lot. This stamp also has some of the strands of hair drawn in as part of the stamp, so you can use those as a guide when adding darker areas. If you just add dark on those lines, that's a quick way to add shading. I mostly tried to go for darkest closest to her face and darkest here where you can see I'm doing on the outer edge of her hair, I guess you would call it, and then going down the middle and adding a few lines in there. So the more paint I have on my brush, the darker the color is going to be. And I'm just using kind of a flicking, sketchy motion with my brush as I go. Now that is still kind of wet underneath, so it is blending out, so it's not a stark line. The second video I did that was very dry underneath, and those lines were more sketchy looking. Once that was dry, I am now just picking up a little bit of yellow. I wanted it to be less of a purplish kind of red and more of a golden red. So just very lightly with mostly water and a little bit of yellow, I'm adding some of that right over the top. I'm not using too much water because I don't want all of that other red paint to just start blending and become a flat color, but a little bit here and there. And this is one thing I love about watercolors, is how you can go back in and kind of tint the colors and easily add other colors right on top. And while I'm working on her hair, I'll also go ahead and color in her eyebrows, using that same red color that I first started with. And then for an added detail on her hair, I'm just using a Pit Artist pen, and this is just a dark brown color, and just adding a few dots into the hairline. And this is just another fun thing you can do with these images. There's so many different ways you can embellish the hair. You could do this with a white gel pen if you wanted to pull some white accents into the hair. You could stamp even little tiny flowers into the hair for like a tone-on-tone look. It's so fun to just play and embellish these as you go and to change it up each time you use the stamp. So I thought when I first started I was just going to do a few right along the edge of her hair, but then I just went crazy and added a whole bunch in. Now I'm ready to paint the poppy, and so I'm doing a very basic shading on this. I'm just starting by putting a flat wash of yellow color onto the petal. Then I will go back, oh, not quite yet. I'll do that flat wash over on the entire thing. Then I let that dry, and now I'm going back in and just using a bit of orange to darken up the petals here on the outside where they're behind that front petal. And I'm not spending too much time doing the shading with the watercolors on this because I will be going back with colored pencils. But this provides a really nice base layer of shading, so when I do my colored pencil work, it's very minimal the amount that it needs because the base colors are already done here. I did pull in a touch of that red that's the same color as her hair, sort of tie those two elements together on the panel. And I think it's such fun to really go through your stash of floral images and combine them with these girls. And the scale does not have to be perfect. As you can see with this, I think that adds sort of to the whimsy of the finished card design. Just adding a little bit of that yellow here and blending that out with water as it moves towards the tip of the petal. And I just keep going back and forth and working things until I'm happy with the look. Then I'll also paint Just basically, for the most part, a flat wash of green onto the stems in these buds. And then I'll go back and do the shading here with the colored pencils. So I'm using the Art Grip colored pencils from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft. I love the vibrancy of these colored pencils. Because I have that watercolor wash already down and a lot of the shading done, I don't have to spend too much time with the colored pencils. But it is amazing what a difference it adds when you add just a touch of that darker color and some of the texture that you get by coloring with the colored pencils on top of the watercolor paper. This is also a great way to do some shading if you feel like when you paint with watercolors that you just don't have as much control. This is a great way to get a watercolor look, but also the control that you have when using the colored pencils. It adds a brightness to the watercolor too once it's dry. Just putting a little bit of touch of that orange down here at the bottom. But not too much because I want the center petal to look like it's in front of those other two. And if you have any sketchy lines that you don't care for from the colored pencils, if you use your lightest colored pencil and go over the top, then you can sort of fade those out as they fade from darker to light. And here I'm adding a touch of shading using the green. And on these small areas, I find it's just easier sometimes to get in there with the colored pencils than it is with the water and the brush. And I'm so sorry I'm off camera there. I'm just adding the green shading to the other bud. So before we go to the next step, I just wanted to give you a little bit closer look at the shading on that poppy. And now we'll move on. So for the background, I'm just using those same watercolors that I used on the rest of the panel. And I'm just putting a light green down here at the bottom. I'm not too worried about going over those stems. If they bleed out a little bit, it's the same green color that I'm painting onto the background. But I am being careful not to go too close next to either her skin or as we work up on the top close to her hair, because I don't want those watercolors to reconstitute and start bleeding out into the background. So often I paint my background with the darkest color closest to the image that was stamped, but for her I decided to do just a really light blue sort of cloudy background, and I put the darkest color towards the outer edge of the card. Just gives a little bit different look. While it's wet, I can drop in more color and then blend it out with water. Working wet onto wet helps you avoid some of those really harsh edges. You can keep working it while it is still wet before it dries, and you don't get quite as harsh of a line as you fade from darker color to light. And now that she is all colored in, I decided to add a little bit more stamping along the bottom just to give us some more interest to the bottom of the image and to ground it a bit. So I am using the grass from the So Lucky transparent set, and I'm inking that using, let me look here at my list, Spanish Moss VersaFine ink. And I just kind of tilting it and moving it along the bottom as I go. This is a really handy stamp. I use this a lot for backgrounds, and it was fun to pull it in here and incorporate it with this portrait stamp. You could also stamp more flowers. Our transparent set Sprigs would be really pretty stamped along the bottom, and it has a lot of silhouette style floral stamps. And if you were doing this in an art journal, this would also be a great place down here at the bottom or on her dress to add your journaling or to stamp a sentiment or put a quote. I've almost got that all the way across the bottom. Finally, to finish things off, I'm just putting a little bit of Memento Danube Blue ink with the ink blending tool and a foam pad along the top. I like the depth that adds when putting the inks very lightly on top of the watercolors. And then this is just gathered twigs distress ink applied with an ink blending tool and a foam pad, and I just add that all the way around the perimeter of the card. The last step for the outside of this card, and it is a 5x7 card, is to add the sentiment. And for this, I am using the This Way and Labels matching stamp set and creative die, along with the spiritual snippets. And I use this for all 3 of the cards in this series. And I just went ahead and stamped the word faith and the outline on the border and added it on top of some tangled thread. But to give a coordinating background or inside of the card, I also used our transparent set faith. So that word faith on the outside ties in with the sentiment faith on the inside. I added some ink blending and a light stamping of that poppy stamp to coordinate. And what I'll do is when I'm ready to mail this, I will mount both the outside and the inside to a 5x7 note card. I like to work on 2 separate pieces of paper rather than on the note card itself. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, and on our website. And I've linked to all of those down in the YouTube description box below. And if you stay tuned, here at the end is a list of all the supplies used in creating this card.